I will now call to order the study session meeting of July 15th, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically, and members of the council are participating remotely pursuant to the council's electronic participation policy. Public access to the meeting is available on the local government access channel 8 for Comcast and Xfinity subscribers, on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Joanna, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Leidy.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Here.
Councilmember Witkovich.
Here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Downing.
Here.
Councilmember Brown will be absent. Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Duran Mollica.
Here.
Councilmember Escobar.
Here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So we have one item on our agenda this evening, and it is the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board. So I will hand it over to City Manager Geyer and Rupa Venkatesh, Assistant to the City Manager, and they will present. I will share your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Leidy. To start off, and then I'll turn it over to Rupa for her presentation. The reason we're having this discussion tonight is in response to the direction that Council has provided in terms of advancing racial equality and really making that a priority. We've had a previous presentation where we outlined a diversity framework. And so tonight's discussion is focused on creation of a formal board that we're calling Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board. We believe, and I feel strongly that taking this next step is important in our efforts, more important than previous discussions, which involved in really the strategic plan, which had included the creation of a task force. So given everything that's transpired this year and where we're at as a community and as an organization, I think it's really important that the City Council support this next step, which is the formal creation of a Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board. Rupa's going to walk you through the different elements of board creation, and the creation of this board is, I use the term formal in nature per our city charter that provides specific guidance as to what creation of a board looks like. This is not creation of a task force or an informal board. So ultimately, based on the consensus and direction that we get from you this evening, the next step would be to draft, Corey will draft an ordinance that'll come before council on first reading and then follow the ordinance adoption process. So different than what we did with the homelessness task force. And I wanted to point that out for the community's benefit and for your benefit. And certainly we can respond to any specific questions related to that aspect a little bit later. But the other piece that I want you to be aware of is Rupa sent an email out just within the last half hour asking you to hold the dates of both our Saturdays, August 1st and August 8th. We're getting closer on being in a position to solidify the diversity training that council's made a commitment to. So if you can hold those two Saturdays, let Rupa know ASAP if one of those Saturdays does not work. But we're asking you to hold 9 to noon on both of those days. We will pick one of those dates, just one of those dates for that training. We'll be able to provide more of an update next week on that to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rupa, but ultimately the direction that I'm looking for from council this evening on this topic is, does council support creation of the Diversity, Inclusivity, Social Equity Board, and we can talk through any types of changes that you want to make based on what's outlined before you this evening. One overarching change to note is we did go ahead and make some tweaks to the schedule. So the packet and the PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see tonight does include date changes on the implementation timeline, and that was the result of pushing back the first reading date. I would say I was overly ambitious about getting that to first reading on July 27th, and we need to make sure we have adequate time to really put a good ordinance together. So my apologies for that change. So Rupa, go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. So the first two slides that you're going to see is something that I've seen a lot in the diversity trainings that I've been a part of. And I think it's just a good introduction to what we mean by diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So if you can go to the first slide. So diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. You can take that one step further to say belonging is wanting to stay at the party. And what I see here in Northglenn with the creation of this board, we're going to go even farther by asking our community to plan the party with us. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And this is something else that I've seen a lot in diversity training to explain what the difference is between equality and equity. So equity means that your circumstances shouldn't determine your outcome. So for example, in this image, your height, so your circumstance that you don't have control over, shouldn't determine your outcome of whether or not you can see the baseball game. So with equality, everybody's given the same box, but it doesn't help the shortest person in the image. So equity is giving that shortest person the tools to change his outcome in order to be able to see the baseball game like everyone else. You can go to the next slide. And this, I just wanted to bring up real quick. So this is the diversity, inclusivity, and social equity framework that was previously presented to council. And Councilmember Goff had made a good point about the phases. She had said, do we really need to finish all the work and start the conversation and then move to delve deeper and then to implement change? But I just want to emphasize that the framework is not a linear process. And the creation of this board, I really see a lot of the different action items that were outlined in these phases being accomplished with this board. And for the next slide, I do apologize for the text-heavy slide, but I think it's important that you understand what the purpose of the board is. So we want the board to support the City Council's strategic focus on diversity, develop an annual plan that advances racial equity in the city, to celebrate and encourage understanding of the diversity of the city's population, to help the facilitator create robust opportunities to listen to the community, and based on that feedback to inform the city's future decision-making, advise council on community concerns, and to also help council gain an understanding of different perspectives in the community, to encourage education programs, promote engagement opportunities, and also encourage diversity on city boards and commissions. So we want the members of this board to be community leaders and really encourage those that normally would not participate in these processes to apply for vacancies on city boards and commissions. We also would like the board to recommend changes to policies that may create racial disparity, and to provide advice on creating a climate of inclusion and increasing cultural competency within the city, and then to advise the council on other matters as it relates to diversity, inclusivity, and social equity. So, membership composition. So in order to ensure that the board is able to advise council on how to improve outcomes for all groups, we need to ensure that all groups are represented as much as possible on this board. So we want to encourage diversity in race, religion, country of origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, socioeconomic status, age, diversity in professions and education levels, diversity in length of residency in Northglenn, we do want these members to be active in the community so that they are community leaders and they really can tell us, who the underrepresented populations are and also be that voice for those populations. We want them to have a genuine interest in advancing these type of efforts. Those that traditionally don't engage with the city, we encourage those residents to apply as well. And so each ward, we have 4 wards in the city. So each ward will be represented by 2 residents and 1 member at large. So membership requirements. We do obviously want members to be residents of the city of Northglenn, 16 years or older. So we wanted to encourage younger populations to apply to be a member. Participation in DEI training annually, to attend regularly scheduled meetings. So we recommend that the meetings be held once a month and not on Mondays, since we have council meetings on Mondays, but we haven't selected a specific day yet. We want to leave that up to the board members, and we don't want that to be a barrier when they apply. They should be liaisons within the community to consistently receive feedback and report back to the board, participate in board programming. So those are things like the listening tours and the education programs and any other programming that they recommend. We do understand that these topics can be sensitive in nature. So we encourage that everybody be professional and respectful, and then to maintain any confidential information. So members could be sharing their own personal experiences that they don't necessarily want to be shared with outside of the board. So we ask that confidential information remain confidential. Oh, and sorry, one part of the requirement. So it's not a requirement, but we do encourage resident or board members to participate in Citizens Academy and the Police Academy. But we didn't want to make that a requirement because we do understand it is time intensive. So membership selection. So there will be an application that will be both in English and Spanish, and we'll have paper applications and online applications. So council members will review applications that are received for their own ward. And once all those applications have been received, then the council member will select who they want to interview. And then each council member will have the opportunity to nominate 1 candidate in their ward. And then from the remaining applications, the mayor will be able to select 1 member at large. So that'll be a total of 9 members. And then the appointment will formally be made at a council meeting through a resolution. So timeline for implementation, this is the change that Heather had mentioned. So August 10th is the first reading. So because the board is going to be created by ordinance, Corey needs time to put that together. And then we'll advertise. So with the first reading, essentially the council will make that commitment to creating this board. So then that way we'll be able to advertise the opportunity in the August and September connection. Another idea that we had is to send out postcards to every household to let them know about the opportunity. And that cost will be about $7,000. August 24th will be the second reading and public hearing. And that will be the formal adoption of the board. Applications will be open August 11th to September 4th. Interviews will be held that week of September 14th. And from there, council is going to appoint their person on September 28th by a resolution. And then in October, we'll have the first board meeting and orientation. So membership terms, I'm not going to go through every single board or commission, but this is just to give you an idea of how we came up with the recommendation that the 9 members serve 3-year terms. So a lot of the already existing boards and commissions have 3-year terms. So that's our recommendation. And then, so initial tasks that we thought the board can come up with, so participate in the DEI training. And then we thought it was really important that the board themselves define what diversity, inclusivity, and social equity means to them. and then create vision and mission statements. So they have that ownership. Then the board can also help the facilitator design these community listening tours. So as community leaders, they'll be able to help the facilitator identify those underrepresented groups that we need to hear from that don't traditionally participate and engage with us. And then based on that feedback from those listening tours, develop a work plan and really define that question of what is it that we need to, what is the problem and how can the city help advance these, help advance diversity, inclusivity, and social equity in our city. And this slide is not really part of this community board, but as I was talking with Gare and some other facilitators and consultants that we would potentially work with, they really did emphasize the need for a core internal team. So the Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Equity Board are going to be recommending policy changes, but they're not actually going to be implementing those changes. City staff is. So while the board is, they're going to need information that they won't necessarily have access to. So they'll have access to this core internal team that they can work with to ask those questions so they can make those recommendations. And it was recommended to us that based on our size, it would be composed of 13 to 20 employees across departments and levels. So by levels, that means not just directors, managers, and supervisors, but also frontline employees, because they're the ones that actually are doing a lot of the groundwork, and they're the ones that interact with residents. So we want to really make sure that they're represented in this group. And then this internal group will go through the intensive training with Gare and create the race and equity toolkit. And I think that is the end. So I will open it up now for questions, and we definitely want to hear your feedback.
Okay, I have Councilmember Peterson, Councilmember Witkovich will be next, and Councilmember Goff after that.
Yeah, just real quick. Thanks, Rupa. That's a fantastic presentation. So if we're talking about a core group of Northglenn employees of 13 to 20 as a cohort, and this group arguably is going to be meeting, I would guess, in the evening, is this going to be something that's voluntary for the Northglenn employees, or is this going to be something that they would be compensated for above and beyond their regular work hours if they're required to be a part of this group for depth purposes?
Yeah, so I don't really see the core internal group going to the board meetings. So I would be the person that would be the liaison for the staff member that'll be going to the board meetings. So any questions that they would have, I can relay that back to the internal team, but it's not something where the internal team would go, like they wouldn't be required to go to these board meetings.
Thank you.
And I would just add to Councilmember Peterson that in addition, Rupa will be the primary staff contact because we have a staff liaison to all of our boards and commissions. Myself and once I get an HR director hired, that individual, I've designed that position for that individual to serve as our chief diversity officer. So it would be very likely that that position and we would be attending these meetings definitely on the onset, and then based on the work that progresses, we would attend as needed. But if at any point we had a need to have employees who are non-exempt attend an evening meeting, they would be compensated for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Witkovich.
Thank you, Mayor. I support creation of this board pretty much as laid out. I just have a few clarifying questions, I guess. On the application under eligibility, it says you need to be at least 16 years old, but then on the application, it asks if you're at least 18 years old. So I don't know if that's inconsistent, if we want it like that or not. But then my point. Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That was definitely a mistake that I should have changed. So we'll correct that. Yeah. Thank you for pointing
Okay. Well, I agree with we should go down to 16 years old. That would be my opinion. But then my real question is, we want to have this membership composition, diversity in race, religion, gender identity, age, all that stuff. But how will we know that stuff if it's not on the application? So I don't know how we get to that. I mean, I don't know what was your thinking on that, Rupa?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there is a question on here that asks what your race and ethnicity is, but maybe we could change, instead of saying, are you at least 16 years old, we can just have, how old are you?
Sure, but then, I mean, you've also got to cover religion, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic status. I agree all those things are important, but I just don't know how we get to those. Is it are we interviewing? I'm not sure. So that was my biggest question. And occupation is on here, employer as well. I don't know if it's really necessary that we know who the employer is. And then I guess one other thing that maybe we would consider is if the individual is a homeowner versus a renter, because I think it's important that we kind of cover both of those as well. So those are just my ideas.
Thank you. I have Councilmember Goff, and then Duran Mullica, and then Escabel.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of maybe like nitty-gritty kind of questions, but we on one of the slides it says each ward is represented by 2 residents, and then we have the member at large. But then somewhere else you had said that each council member nominates 1 candidate in their ward. So I'm just not sure. What are we nominating 2? I mean, why is one number 2 and the other one is 1?
Yeah, so each ward is represented by 2 council members. So each council member would nominate.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, and then I would encourage us to send out the postcards. I think we need to do whatever we can, even if people can brainstorm something that we've never done before to try to get more people involved. You know, I don't know, like a reverse 911 call, or I don't know, something. Just cover all the bases as many ways, mediums as we can. And then the other question I had was, in some places we're calling this the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board, but then you had this, I can't remember what it stands for now, this DEI, Diversity, whatever, Equity and Inclusivity. What's the difference? Why are we using one term and the other term?
Yeah, so the board is actually called Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity. So that's the DISEB. But then the actual training that they complete, based on some of the facilitators or trainers that we're talking to, they call their training DEI, so Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Training. Okay. Is there a reason why we decided to pick the name that we have? You know, the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board. That was just my recommendation. We can certainly change it. Yeah. I guess I don't particularly have a reason to change it. I was just curious, as you know, like if a common term is the DEI, maybe we want to stick with the common term, but I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Councilmember Mullica.
I have a couple questions. And I guess one is about how we're going to choose them. I guess similar to what Catherine was just asking. And so each council member is going to essentially nominate 1 candidate, and then the interview is going to happen in front of the whole council for us to approve.
So it's what you guys want to do, but my recommendation is that, I mean, if you want, you can have, like each ward can interview their candidates. You know what I mean? Okay. Yeah. And then that way you're not like nominating the same candidate in your ward. But it's however you guys want to do the interviews. But I wasn't imagining it being in front of the whole council.
Oh, okay. All right. I think I just read that as the whole council is going to interview all the people that were appointed. And I was curious, what's the point of the interview if you're being appointed to it? So, okay, well, I actually think that we should do interviews because it's typically how we do things. And so if that varies by ward, I'm not sure if that's allowed. So if it's up to me and Catherine for how we do Ward 3, so can it vary by ward, or are each of us allowed to kind of create that own process?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Just curious.
Sorry, Councilmember Malika. I would just add that we can create a consistent template as like a framework for each for council members to work with within each ward if you'd like us to do that. So there's some semblance of consistency, which I think is important. But then, if there's variation, we can figure out what that variation and flexibility looks like for you.
Okay, great. And yeah, and that's something of course, I haven't talked with Catherine about to see what our idea is going to be, but when we have that conversation, then I guess we could move forward with that. My other question was about the training. So doing the Citizens Academy when it comes available, do we have an idea when that's going to come available?
Honestly, no. So that's something that is on my list of things to do. And I don't know if we can honestly have those academies right now because of COVID and the size limit still.
Okay. And then the same for the CPN training. So is it possible, because CPN is a really big commitment, would there even be a possibility of creating a smaller condensed version specifically for this board? Because I think that's an important perspective to bring forward. And I'd hate for folks not to be able to do it because the time commitment's so big. So I don't know. That was just an idea that I had.
That's really good.
Other than that, I really support the board and the application. And I feel like backing up what Ashley was talking about of, having space on the application to actually have people fill out how they identify in various groups would be helpful.
Thank you. So I have Councilmember Escabel, and then Mayor Pro Tem Wolford, and then Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I had two questions, but I think Rupa answered the first one, and that was on how council would be advised and how that information would flow. So from what you said, Rupa, I am assuming you are going to be the liaison, and you will bring back to council the information from this board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the second one, my second question is on the memorandum and on the presentation, I noticed there's a difference in that it says in the memorandum under membership of the board should include, and I think it's the 5th bullet point. I'm sorry, it's the 4th bullet point. Those who do not, and it says do no, but I know it means do not traditionally engage in the city and or. So I have an issue with the, maybe that's not the right word, issue. I have a concern with the word traditionally, if that's going to be used in, you did not use it in your PowerPoint. And the term tradition has a lot of different meanings. The Confederate flag is a tradition. And I would hate us to go down the rabbit hole of tradition, because that could spark all kinds of different, my tradition, your tradition, their tradition. I would prefer more historically, or another word. I'll let the framers talk about that, if that's going to be included in the, I don't know which one we're using, we're going to use them both, because there is a difference.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I wasn't thinking traditionally in that sense, but I appreciate that perspective. So when we're doing any sort of advertisement or communication on it. I do like the word historically better than traditionally. So thank you for bringing that up.
It sounds like you're blaming the people for not being involved.
Okay.
The city taking us.
Okay, I just had a comment from my wife, and she says that sounds like we're blaming people when we use that
For
term.
not engaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair point. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford?
All right, I'm going to do the best I can with my assistant over here. So a couple of logistical questions. I think overall I support the concept and the way that it's built, and appreciate all of the work that went into this. I guess I'm just curious about, so say we go through the interview process and, my ward partner and I identify the two folks that we really, I know, I need you to wait. Identify the two folks that we believe could do a good job representing Ward 4. And then we bring those folks to council, and another council member has, major concerns or issues with somebody that we're bringing forward. Like, are we agreeing to have a conversation once these folks have been identified, or are they just going to be appointed by virtue of the fact that we're nominating them?
Heather, if you don't mind, I'll defer that question to you.
Sure. I think the spirit of the way this is designed is that we would be relying on each council member within the wards, and then collectively as representatives of the ward to be bringing forward these individuals. Certainly, I think there's space for council to have a collective discussion about all of those individuals that you're recommending to be appointed. And certainly if there were ever any concerns or things like that, that discussion can be had either prior to the actual appointment that would be made of those individuals in the form of a resolution. So I think it would be something that it would be important for staff to have a heads up on if we need to build in additional time in advance of the actual appointments being made, or in a different format if you're thinking a little bit differently about what I just recommended.
No, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we all have ample time to consider who's going to be a part of this board in the future. I do think it's really important that if council members are going to be doing interviews either separately or in pairs, that we do have some questions that are the same and consistent throughout every interview, because I think it's important that residents have the same experience and can trust that they're going through the same process as they're being vetted here. And then the other question I had was, how will we fill vacancies in the future?
I think we would do a process similar to how we respond to vacancies on existing boards and commissions. We'd go through an appropriate advertisement, promotion opportunity. We'd advise council when a vacancy is going to occur. And, if council had a desire to be very specific about what that looked like, we can have that conversation when it occurs after the board set up. I don't know that you need to figure that out now, but, currently if we have a vacancy on planning commission or a Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, we let council know. We encourage you to reach out to individuals within your wards and encourage individuals to apply and do the appropriate promotion and connection on our different social media channels, and always open to other suggestions as well if council wanted to take that a step further.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to think through logistically, like we're, taking a moment to, put a deadline out there. We're going to look at all of the applications and choose the folks who are going to be, the best fit for this board. And I just I feel like if we have a vacancy, we're not going to have that same opportunity to build up a pool of really great candidates and be able to choose the best fit for the role. So I do think that we need to figure out a way that's consistent for filling vacancies with the process that we're creating for this board specifically.
Oh, I see what so if I can make sure I'm understanding what you're getting to, Mayor Pro Tem Wilford, you'd want to use a consistent process to include an interview and that would be consistent with what we do with other boards and commissions. So we can outline that for you.
No, I totally understand that. I think the difference is with this board and commission, we'll have a pool of applicants versus a rolling application where, you know, the first person who hears about it can apply and it's going to be, you know, appointed because we don't have any other options. So anyway, I'll leave it. I think there's certainly some more space for conversation there. And then one thing I'd really love to propose is actually adding a 10th member and designating that 10th member as somebody who is 16 or, you know, is a younger resident of our community, because my concern is that, you know, we'll go through all of these applications and we may not have young people who are put forward because maybe we're expecting it to happen in another ward. And I think it's really important that we hold space for our young people on this committee and on others as well in the future. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So I'm just going to run through. I've been trying to take notes as hands have gone back up. So I have Councilmember Peterson, and then Witkovich, and then Duran-Mullica, and then Goff. That's what I have so far. Okay. So Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. Rupa and Heather, a quick question on this and for council's consideration. If the questions are asking our residents to self-identify in a variety of different categories, many of which are protected classes under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. What happens, has anybody thought about the fact is as people are self-identifying, what happens when somebody is not picked and they come forward to the city and they say, wait a minute, you didn't pick me because of maybe some de facto discrimination against X, Y, and Z group that I've self-identified as?
That's a great question, Councilmember Peterson, and I'm going to share a thought on that, and then I'll defer to Ruthie on this. I would say that the way we have to ask it on the application is voluntary response. So if an individual doesn't feel comfortable sharing and disclosing that information, he or she does not have to. So Ruthie, do you have can you take that a step further?
You know, Corey always says I may not have to talk at these. No, I think I would agree with you, Heather, making it voluntary, sort of, you know, they can choose to either answer that. Obviously, when you go to have these in-person interviews, well, in-person or over Zoom, however they come about, you're going to learn things about the person as you meet them. But yeah, having it as a voluntary question, I think, is the best way to go. That way, if they choose to divulge that information on the application, great. We can certainly put in some language in the application. I can talk to Corey about that. I did review the application. I mean, like most things, we're going to have to, you know, tweak it based on your conversations here tonight. But we could put language in there that sort of protects the city from that information being used against you. I think is probably the best way to go. And I can certainly, like I said, follow up with Corey and see if he has any thoughts on that. But I would agree with you, Heather, that making it voluntary is the better way to go. And then I did have another thought on that, and I can't remember it at the moment. But if it comes to me, I'll raise my hand and get it out there.
Okay.
And following up on that, I think the stronger question is, as opposed to self-identify, is explaining and describing your commitment to diversity personally and your vision for diversity for the city long term. And I would hate to have people that are really passionate and really care about this that are de facto excluded from this using, de facto discrimination to fight larger discrimination, and so that's why I think, it's hard to tell somebody's passion and somebody's reality based on the box they check as opposed to somebody else. So that would be something I would ask folks to consider a little bit. Going back to Catherine's point, which was really, really good in terms of sending the cards to request people to be a part of this. Just a quick question on precedent. Have we done that and sent the cards for other boards, inviting people to be a part of other boards? And if we have, that's fine. If we haven't, if that's $7,000 and we have asked our staff and our services to take a 10 to 15% cut in services, I'm hesitant to just kind of say, let's do this. If we haven't done this before, why should we send cards for this committee as opposed to any other committees that we've asked people to be a part of? So I would ask staff or Heather on precedent on that, please.
That's a great question, Councilmember Peterson. I think the thinking behind behind what we're recommending with the mailing of postcards is this is a new board that the council is establishing. And so the reference point that I have in the time that I've been here is, I would say, and Joanna, our city clerk, please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong with this. We typically use our connection newsletter, social media channels to in word of mouth to promote board and commission vacancies. I'm not aware of, since I've been here, sending out a postcard, with the exception of using a postcard to notify residents when we've had a vacancy at the council level. So I think part of the thinking is aligned with those processes that have taken place. In addition, because we know it's a good way to reach residents, and we've seen results as in doing so. Now, as a result of doing this, could we take a step back and ask the question, well, should we be doing this for all board and commission vacancies? You probably could make an argument, yes, there's a cost related to it, but I would also defer back to our other boards and commissions are established, and this is a brand new board that we're creating. So it doesn't yet have the, it's not known in the community. And so as you know, part of the goal of creating a civic academy is to really create a leadership pipeline where we engage residents and we teach them about local government, and they want to either continue to serve on, if they're already serving on boards and commissions, or take that step. And ultimately, if they want to run for council or mayor at some point, they have the ability to do that. So I'm not giving you a specific answer other than our thought process was to use, in order to really get the reach that I think we want to get with establishing this board, we would send out the postcards. I appreciate your comments about the 15% reduction in savings. I wouldn't advance that idea if I didn't feel comfortable that we could absorb the cost.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Witkovich.
Thank you, Mayor. I 100% support the postcards. I think we've talked about being creative in how we reach people because we don't get a lot of participation in Northglenn for lots of different things. So I definitely support this. And if we're successful, then maybe we have a conversation later about doing it for other vacancies. But yeah, I would really like to do it for this and see if we can get more participation. Let's see. And I also wanted to throw out my support for a Special Citizens Academy, as Councilmember Mullica brought up. I spoke with Officer Lund. It's probably been a couple weeks now, but he really had no idea when the next Citizens Academy was going to happen. But perhaps if we come to him with the idea of a smaller one, condensed, shorter, for the purposes of this board, maybe we could make that happen. I like that idea. I also like Councilmember Wilford's idea about a 10th member for a 16 or 17-year-old. Yeah, I agree with your reasons. But then that also brings up the idea or the thought for me, you know, if we were expecting maybe somebody else was going to appoint a 16-year-old, what about the other diversity classes that we're trying to include? How will we have a discussion, you know, that we are including lots of different people? What if we end up with all of the same types of folks? Is that okay? And I guess that's just a rhetorical question, but yeah, I think there does need to be some discussion about the candidates. And I think that's all I have for now. Thanks, Mayor.
So to your point, Councilmember Witkovich, I had written that down as one of my questions as well. And so thinking about a way that we can collaborate and talk to each other in some format, either with the applications or I don't know. I think we have to collaborate across wards because there is a potential that we could not have the diversity we're looking for. So thank you for bringing that up. Councilmember Mullica.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you two are of how do we, I feel like it needs to be a broader discussion among council. And when I originally pictured this, I figured it would be something similar to how we appointed, Lauren and Randall, where we had interviews and then we all interviewed together. And then we had the names and the numbers and spreadsheets and stuff like that. I mean, like, it could be a better elaborate process. I'm open to ideas, but I kind of pictured it as something like a decision that the group made together. And I think that could be helpful, just trying to make sure that we're seeing the broader picture of the group that we're trying to form, and make sure we have, all the appropriate perspectives that we're kind of looking for at the table, including like a youth voice, because I think that's actually really important. And so I don't know how else to really do that versus just doing kind of like a large interview process that we've done in the past. So, I mean, to throw an idea out there, it could be that applicants are received and then each ward gets to nominate, X applicants for an interview. I mean, we could do that because that was always an issue in the past of like, how do we limit who gets an interview and doesn't get an interview? So we just interviewed everybody. So I don't know, that's an idea. But I'm open to some other thoughts. I do have one clarifying question though too. So is there going to be a council liaison to this board like we have for other boards? Like a city council member? Is that,
yeah, sorry, yes.
Decided? Sorry. We are going to have one? Okay,
yes, cool. Yeah.
Just double checking, making sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, so any other ideas people have for interviews and picking applicants, I'm open to, but I do feel like, yeah, we need to have kind of like a broader versus a siloed approach. I don't know if that would be as successful.
Councilmember Goff.
Okay, thank you. I can usually read my name when I'm reading lips, but some of my questions have kind of come up since I was first thinking about it. And I just did want to also verify that we were going to have a council member on the board. So at this point, if we have two from each ward, one at large, and one council member, that's an even number. And then we're talking about making sure we have a 16-year-old. That would make it I'm just trying to figure out the logistics if there's something that has to be voted on or, whatever, if we want an odd number of people so we don't have ties. But I'm just putting that out there. But then really, to go back to the idea of, the interview process and how we ensure that we actually get a diverse group and that we're including all the viewpoints that we want to get from our residents, that it's possible that we could each ward could look at the at some point either the staff looks at all the applications and kind of gets an idea, because we don't really know. I mean, maybe we won't get enough people applying for this. I just don't know. I hope we do. I think we will, but somebody can kind of get it. We do need a way to ensure that there's more of an equitable spread across the types of people that we're hoping to get to be represented on this board. It could be that each ward nominates or narrows down to, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 candidates, and then we get together. I mean, I don't know that I want to have as a whole council, all of us going through a discussion or interview process with, I don't know, 20, 25, I don't know how many candidates we're going to have. I think that gets very unwieldy. People get kind of overwhelmed trying to sort through and remembering who's who. So if we're going to go by ward, maybe some way to narrow it down to, I don't know, a certain number. And then, and maybe not by each member, but just by ward, like Julie and I could pick 3 people or whatever, however many people, or all the people that we think would be a good, good number of, or good members for this board. And then as a council, we kind of discuss, do we have, like if we choose this person, then then we don't, then maybe we should choose this person to balance, to get that balanced approach or that overall view that we're looking for. It is tricky because we want to include everybody, but we also don't want to say, oh, you can't be on the board because we already have somebody like you. I mean, we don't want it to come across that that's what we're doing. So I don't know, that wasn't really a question. I don't know, maybe it's more confusing than anything. But I would say that I do think it's worth sending the postcards out, because not only because this is a new board, but because this, going back to the little images that Rupa gave us about in the quote about inclusivity and belonging, we need to reach out to people that don't look at the newspaper or get the newspaper, the people that maybe don't do social media, whatever. The whole point of creating this board is to reach people who we might not otherwise be able to reach. And that's it.
So I have Antonio, Councilmember Escobar, and then Councilmember Downing is next.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got notes all over the place here now, so I hope I didn't confuse everybody more. But from the presentation, I got the impression that there was not going to be a council member on that board. So the question is there a council member on there or is there not?
Yeah, so that's my fault for excluding that. But I think on all of our other boards and commissions, there is a council liaison. So yes, there would be a council liaison for this board. Okay, so to that point that Catherine was talking about, the liaisons on that board don't vote. Council does not have a vote on the board. On the current boards that we have, as far as I understand.
Correct.
So, is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct.
Okay. So, in terms of all applications versus ward applications, are Jenny and I going to see just ward applications, or are we going to see all applications?
So I think that's something that would be up to you guys. So some ideas that were tossed around. So for your ward, so from what I'm hearing, so you and the Mayor Pro Tem would have a pool of applications for just your ward. And then an idea was that you would select, so the two of you would select applicants to be interviewed from your pool and then bring that forward to council for council as a whole to interview everybody. Was an idea that I heard.
So along that line, then I would support Mayor's idea of collaboration. We would have to collaborate if we're going to do that, because in reality, I'm only getting one person on the board. And, of course, from where I sit, I want to have more than one. So if I collaborate with Julie or Meredith or whoever, then I feel like I got more than one. Even though I only got one, I still feel like I won somebody over because I wanted this type of this type of individual to sit on the board. And those of you that know me and know that my experience in education, I really, really, really support mentoring teens. So my recommendation would be to have a teen from each ward. I know that adds 4 members. You can make them non-voting if you want to, or whatever, but I think having a teen from each ward would strengthen the board and educate our young people, much like the Youth Commission, educate them in how to run meetings, participate in meetings, be respectful in meetings, decor, demeanor, whatever it's all about education. And I don't think that would be a big deal. If we're increasing by putting in a council member, I'm sure we could, and if not 1 from each ward, 2 that we could agree on. 2 that, Ward 1 and 2 could recommend 1, and Ward 3 and 4 could recommend 1. But we need to do a better job of reaching our young people. And, the Citizens Police Academy. I know it's been tossed around from Julie to to Ashley. On the CPAN meeting last night, Chief spoke and he said he was trying to get one started in September, but that was unlikely because of the COVID situation that we're in. And then one of the members suggested, could they do it virtually? And he's going to look into that. Because the academies, besides the visitation to the AdCom and trip to the firing range, it's all done classroom style. So virtual model might work very well. So that's my 4 cents instead of 2. Thank you.
Councilmember Downing.
Thank you. I want to address Councilwoman Goff and Councilman Esquivel kind of addressed it a little bit. I am concerned about increasing the board to an even number just for voting purposes. I don't mind increasing it to 11 or 13 if you want to have 1 youth from each board or 1 ward, but an even number usually, and especially in this type of board, it may lead to longer meetings, with a vote, so odd numbers are better than even numbers, and whatever number we choose is fine with me. I really don't care. I love the idea of reaching out to the community, postcards, social media, whatever we can do. I think it's really important to do it. I don't know that we're setting a precedent at this time because it's a new board and it's very important. I love the idea of having it bilingual, so that everyone or most everyone has an opportunity to take advantage of it if they can. The one thing that I'm really, really concerned about is, and I think several people have voiced this, is the process of appointing the board members. I don't have a good idea what to do. And I'm wondering if staff can reach out to maybe some of the other cities that have these type of boards, Westminster and some of the others, and find out how they appointed the initial board to see what their process was, because I think we're struggling with this. I know I certainly am trying to figure out the best way to do it. So just to throw that out there. I think, but other than that, I thank Rupa for putting this together. She did a great job, getting this started. So, but those are some of my concerns.
Thank you. So Randall, I do see your hand, but I'm going to jump in with a couple of my questions, and then it'll be your turn. So hearing, some of these concerns about process, I had a couple of ideas. One is that I would be happy to have the at-large mayor appointee be the youth one. I think that's perfectly fine, especially if each ward is getting 2, then we're not adding a 10th member. That's just the at-large member. So I'm happy to do that. I do think the postcard may have to be a little larger than normal because our small ones won't do bilingual. But I think it's important that this message does go out in English and Spanish. I wondered about thinking through that. How do we discuss the applicants in a way across ward that we're able to make sure that we're not duplicating? I wrote down, I think it'd be important for Rupa to attend all of the interview sessions. So that does add a lot on you, but if you're that staff liaison person, you could be that for us during this process as well. Because to Catherine's point, if we're interviewing multiple people per ward, we're looking at either 4 different nights to get that done. I mean, we could be interviewing up to 30 people to, depending on how many applicants we have per ward. So I liked the unique process. I thought it was really creative, and I think it actually enables us to connect ward by ward with our residents. And so just as an example, Ashley and Randall can really do some outreach in Ward 1 to do their process really well. And that feels really personal and connected to the community. So I liked that concept. So if there was a way to make it happen that we can talk to each other, and maybe having Rupa attend all the interview sessions, that might be something that could help. So I had the council liaison question. I had a question: can members on this board serve on other boards in the city?
Right now, we don't have anything to exclude membership on other boards. So that would be up to council to decide if you wanted that to be a requirement. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
Because, the intent of this board is to really dive into programs, policies, and processes that exist within our organization and throughout the community. And so that could be perceived as a barrier, that we're creating a barrier to excluding individuals.
Meaning that they can serve on multiple boards?
If council had the requirement that they only serve on this one board, and then they couldn't serve on others, then so if you currently serve on a board and council says you can't serve on 2, then you would potentially be excluding great individuals.
Don't we have that on some other boards though?
I believe we do, and I can't speak to the specifics of each board, but
it's the CAB board.
Oh, CAB can only do CAB. Okay. I knew I had heard that recently, so I just wasn't sure about that. Okay. And then I did wonder about membership, feeling like this was really broader community focused. I was hoping we would have had a business owner and someone from one of our religious organizations.
Are you saying, do you want them to be like a spot for that in particular?
Yeah, because we have business owners that are really invested in our city, but they don't live here. But
gotcha.
They're very connected to our community, and they're hiring people, and so I just wondered about that. I don't know how everyone else feels about that. That was and some of our religious partners also don't live in the city, but they serve residents in our city, and so their perspective would be valuable, I believe. So I don't know how people feel about that, but that might add 2 more. So, I mean, if I gave up mine to the youth, we have 9. If we could add 2 more, that would put us at 11. I don't know how people feel about that, but okay. Councilmember Peterson, you're the only hand up I see.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I like your idea on what you just said on religious person of faith, as well as a business owner. again, I think the fundamental motivation should be somebody's care and commitment to diversity and equity within the city, as opposed to whatever box somebody's background is able to check. At the same time, as we move forward, I'm not sure if we're here yet and how that goes, but in terms of council representation on this committee, I would, definitely open to hear what everybody wants to do and who might be interested in that. But I do think that Councilwoman Goff would be nothing short of an outstanding addition. She represents the best interest of the city, as all of us do. And I think she would be a great voice of reason and bridging so many different and divergent voices and stuff. Again, I don't know who might or may not be interested in that, and that's nothing pro or against anybody else. But whenever we get to that, I'd love to hear who might be interested in that. But if nobody else is, I think if she's interested in it, Councilwoman Goff would be an outstanding choice for a council liaison. Thank you.
Councilmember Malika.
Hi, hold on 1 second. I'm also listening into the Dr. Cog meeting as we're doing this as well. I'm trying to do both meetings at once here. So I would support Catherine being a council liaison. I know that's probably not the question at hand, but I think she would be amazing. One other thing that I am going to ask is on the application, can we also maybe put a question on there if folks are like bilingual or trilingual, or just what languages folks speak? Because I think that could be a really interesting perspective too, especially since we always have this discussion about how do we, communicate out to our community in different languages. And I feel like if we have somebody who speaks more than one language on this board, it would be a really interesting perspective. And because that is just a constant debate we always have. And so hopefully, we could have someone who could kind of help us improve our efforts on that. And then the final point I want to make is just, I would like to try and still figure out a way that we could do some type of group appointment or interview process. I just feel like that's just important. I worry about the silo work. So I know I said that before, but I think that is just one of my biggest concerns about this.
So can I go back, Julie? Can you describe a process you think that might work? I think we need to figure it out.
Well, I mean, I think we don't know how many applications we're going to get, which is tough. And I think it's actually, thinking about how things typically work, we'll probably see an increase of applicants in Ward 4 because Ward 4 is by far the biggest participants of everything, it seems like. Not a bad thing for Ward 4, they're just great. And so I feel like if there's a way that we could, maybe we review the applicants by ward and then push forward nominees for an interview for the group to kind of then make the final decision. Because I just feel like it feels like the board represents all of us if all of us interview them and we all decide together on appointment. I mean, that just kind of, I think, feels more like of a city unifying board. Yeah, that's my only thought. That's my only idea. Sorry.
Okay. No, thanks. I think we're all trying to mull it over. Councilmember Goff, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mayor. But I don't think tonight's the night to do it, but I would be more than pleased to be the council member liaison for this new board. Just to say that. The question I had, I was going to say, I think if the mayor is giving, well, I shouldn't say giving up, but is going to designate her at-large person to be a 16 or a youth, I think that's great. I don't know if that we necessarily need more. I think it'd be great to have to invite more young people to attend these meetings. I mean, I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know if there's some way. I know some of it has confidentiality issues, but there might be some way we could have other people, youth attend as, non-voting or whatever you want to call it, just to see how that whole process works. But I know we'd have to work out how we can do that appropriately. And then in terms of having business or religious leader on the board, I also like that idea. But on the other hand, if they're not Northglenn residents, again, I don't know if we have a precedent for somebody like that being on a board that has a voting privilege or non-voting, or what the deal would be with that. I think it's important to get their input, but I also do feel like this is Northglenn residents wanting to be heard and wanting to give some input and being able to express how they see inclusivity and acceptance of diversity and what is the other, social justice, social equity. I don't remember all the terms. So, I would like to maybe have a little bit more discussion about a business and religious member, if that's going to come from just our whole pool of applicants, and that would then, or in addition, or what their role would be.
So, Catherine, just to clarify, our youth commission, many of them are not Northglenn residents because the requirement is a Northglenn resident or an Adams 12 student.
Right.
And so that is an example where we do have people that are a part of our community, but not necessarily residents that do have voting rights.
So if we were going to add 2 more members to this group, and then I'm assuming that these 2 wouldn't be coming from a specific ward, they'd be in addition. So then the whole council is going to be interviewing them or not? I mean, I'm just having a little trouble kind of picturing it in my head, how this is going to work if we add those 2.
I don't know. I mean, it was just an idea. I feel like we should have somebody from the business community. And we have quite a few religious organizations in our city. So I just felt like they would be valuable. But if anyone else wants to weigh in, I think now's the time to have that discussion.
Let me just kind of, as we're talking, it occurs to me that some of the stated, goals and activities of this particular board have to do with making some changes in Northglenn city policy and things that the city, has control over. And so I'm not sure how, let's say, I don't know, a business member thought that something should change in the way businesses are, I don't know, putting up signs or whatever. I don't know that Northglenn has the authority to make those changes. So while I think that that's important to have a voice from these people, I'm not sure, how effective they're going to be in terms of trying to accomplish the goals of the board, if it's to create more diversity and inclusivity and equity in Northglenn. So I guess I'm still a little confused about that, but.
Okay, I might disagree a little bit with that simply because they're one person. If it was a board of 11 and the board is going to give recommendations, they're not going to make policy. So I guess I don't feel like it's risky, which is kind of how it sounded like you were describing it, giving one business authority to make policy. That wouldn't work. It's just one person on a board of 11.
No, I know they wouldn't be. It's not that they would have the extra or unwanted authority. It's just that if I'm guessing. Can you say some more about what kind of input or perspective you think that might bring to this board that would be helpful? Maybe that's where I'm just having a little trouble.
Well, I think it's just any other piece. So if we go back to the purpose, a random Ward 1 resident is going to have a perspective, and so is a business owner that's been working in our community. I think they would have a perspective on what diversity looks like, how they're treated as business owners in the city, how they treat their customers, how the customers treat them, how the customers behave in their organization. We have a lot of businesses, and it could be that we put it out there and no business owner has time for that, and they don't want to. And it could be that we have quite a few diverse business owners that are thinking, I would like to be a part of this conversation because of how it kind of feels climate-wise in our city. So, I mean, I just think it'd be an interesting perspective.
I would hope that we could get a business owner who's also a resident. I guess that's my ideal. But I mean, I'm not against having those two people. At this point, it's really more how we're going to, we'll have to hash out how we're going to choose them. I mean, I guess the whole council would choose them. So.
Well, and I think, I'm going to let Mayor Pro Tem go in just a second, but just to clarify, I don't think it would be the corporate owner of Texas Roadhouse. I think we would, if we were going to do a business owner, it would probably be a small business. It would be someone who is interacting with the community every day, right? The president of Lowe's, that doesn't make sense, but someone who's really invested. And I think those are only going to be the people that apply and want to have that conversation with other residents anyway. But Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel like the longer that we have this conversation and talk about process, it, in my mind, seems like it's even more important for us to do the interviews and choose who we want to be on this board together, as opposed to separately and in silos. I think that we may find somebody who's a business owner in Northglenn who's a person of faith. I think that we may find somebody who, I think we're going to find a whole different cast of folks who are applying and who are interested in serving here. And so I don't know that I'm necessarily comfortable with saying we want somebody from the business community. We want somebody who is, from the faith community here, because that's all going to come out in the application and the interview process anyway. And I think that we can be thoughtful once we have our pool of candidates in trying to ensure that we have a diversity of lived experiences and perspectives at the table that we ultimately choose. So I don't know that I feel comfortable just putting those two seats on this board. I think that, we could very quickly get to a very large board if we're going to have someone for the business community and someone from the faith community. Are we going to have someone from the nonprofit community? Are we going to have someone from the senior community? Are we going to have somebody with a different range of ability? I think that we could continue to go down this path when I think all we need to do is just do this process together instead of having council members do the interviews ourselves. The other thing I'm a little concerned about with council members doing individual interviews is I appreciate that it feels a lot more intimate and that, there are a lot more conversations that are being had. I just really wonder how we're being fair and transparent to everybody in that process. So I would like to flesh that out a little bit more. Are we, as council members, doing these interviews on Zoom and anybody can join? I think there are a lot of things, a lot of logistics to factor in, but I continue to believe that it's better if we all do this together since it is a brand new board. And I think that there is going to be a lot of need for coordination here. And then as for having a council member liaison to this board, I think that makes sense. That's what we do with every other board and commission. And I think it's a really important connection for folks to have. Catherine, if you want to do it, great. I think you would be fantastic. And I do think if other people are interested that you should speak up so that we can have a full conversation about that. So I'm just going to pause there and just ask that we really dig in a little bit more into the process.
Okay. As you were talking, it made me think that, and I think Councilmember Mullica mentioned it a second ago, the process, the point system we used for the Ward 1 council seat was really great, that point system. So if we could do that again, I think that would be helpful. So I have Councilmember Mullica, and then Councilmember Esquivel, and then Councilmember Goff.
I actually forgot what my question was. I'm sorry. So I'm going to pass. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Councilmember Esquivel.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to support the idea of clergy because they shepherd a flock. They shepherd their flock within the city for the most part. They know their needs of their community much better than we do. Way much better than we do. And as to the teen on the board, we're not restricting it to one teen, are we?
I don't know.
I mean, if I want to vote a teen and you have a vote for a teen, then that's two teens.
Right.
And if Councilmember Monica wants to support a teen, and that's three teens on the, right? We're not restricting it to one.
So tell me this, Antonio, because it sounds like we're moving away from the individual wards choosing. It sounds like we're going back to a whole council process.
No. My partner, Mayor Pro Tem, gets nominates a person. I nominate a person, right? That's not changing. But
okay, it sounded like Mayor Pro Tem just recommended that it would change.
Oh.
That we do it as a council.
Well, I have no objection to that. I mean, I'd like to see I was more in favor of all applications, but then we started building these applications to be 40 and 25 and whatever. We don't know. We may have 11 applications. We have 11 seats. We may not get a choice. So I favor all applications so that I can get a feel for everyone, but I realize I only have one person to move forward. I'm just saying I'm not going to be restricted. If you as mayor said you're going to pick the teen, then I can also pick a teen for my pick, right?
I think so. I think what I'm hearing though from council members is that they don't want it to be council members picking, like we're picking individually. It sounds like what I'm hearing, and if Councilmember Wilford wants to summarize again, it sounds like what I was hearing is that we're going back to a full council process, that we would still select 2 per ward, but we would do it as a group. And so it wouldn't be Julie picking one and Ashley picking one, and unless we do it that way, but we all partake in the interviews. I think we're still trying to hammer out the process, and I don't know how much further we want to dig in.
I don't want to dig in too deep, but it got confusing. So maybe Mayor Pro Tem can
I'll just simply clarify.
Then I know if I support it or not.
Okay.
I'll just clarify that I wasn't speaking to count to the way in which individuals would be chosen or selected. I was just saying that I think that we all need to be a part of all of the interviews and looking at all of the applications.
So in that vision, I keep going back to the most recent one we did, which was the interviews for Ward 1. Now that was obviously one ward, but we did it together. Are you saying that we just interview together, but then you still get to pick yours, and Antonio picks one and Julie picks one? I mean, I don't know about that part.
I never that was not part of the recommendation that I was making. But I think if we're going to interview as a council, we should, go through the process of scoring and choosing who should be a part of this committee together.
Okay. So would you envision that being like we would do it by ward? So we could do all the Ward 1 applicants and take a break, and then all the Ward 2 applicants and take a break, and the Ward 3, and then, but possibly maybe council members pre-screen and get us to a maximum number of interviewees. Is that something that you guys would support? Like, so for example, because Ward 4, they get 50 applications. Antonio and Jenny sit down and they look through and they say, okay, here's our 5 that we're bringing forward to council. And then Ashley and Randall hit the streets and beg people, and they may get 2 applicants, and then we bring them forward. But maybe we set a maximum number per ward of interviewees, and those are pre-screened by council members. Is that something we would support? I got a thumbs up from Randall. Anybody want to speak to that? Councilmember Malika, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I like your idea of having a max of, I like the idea of 5, because I mean, even if everyone hit the 5, that's still a lot of interviews to do. And that's always a long night for everybody. But I think 5 could be good. And then that way so the applicants come by your ward. Catherine and I would choose up to 5 people to do the interview, and then all of council will decide on all of the board positions moving forward. So it wouldn't be 2 from, so technically though, this is a good question. So in the end of the day, not all wards could be equally representative, right?
Well, I think we still select 2 per ward though.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. All right.
And then I don't know what you do about the at-large one. I mean, I feel like we could pull all the youth interviews and have that be the 9th member. But it's not necessarily picked by me. But I mean, if Antonio was passionate about it, you and I could meet together and go over all the youth applications, and we could pick 5. And then that could be that 9th member.
Okay. I like that idea. I think it could really help narrow the applicants and then still make sure that we have great interviews for all of council.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. I agree. I think we're kind of getting to a point that I feel pretty comfortable understanding, and the process of each ward, each council member working with their ward partner, narrowing it down to 5, and then the whole council would interview those 5. That way, as a whole council, we have a better sense of, what kinds of people are representing, what kinds of groups that we're hoping, or what kind of voices we're hoping to get onto this. I think that the business owner and the faith leader could be included in the list of criteria that we have, diversity in race, religion, et cetera. And I think we could also include in that a business owner, or even a small business owner, if you want to say, a small owner of a small business in Northglenn, however we want to word that, and also something similar for the faith leader, because I do think that we could get all those voices included. I don't know that we necessarily need to expand the group to the board to 11, just because the more people you get, the longer it takes to get anything done. There's just sort of a management piece there with the size. So that's my opinion on that part of it. But I like the way we're going with the interview process.
Thank you. Councilmember Esquivel?
Sorry, didn't take my hand down.
Does the process, how does the new description of the process sound?
Oh, back to me for that question.
Yeah.
I think the way it was presented initially is the one I would support. You know, each council member selects who they want to be on this council from their ward. That's the way it was presented from the beginning, and I'll support that.
Okay, so if we make a change, you won't support the new process.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm trying to clarify because it feels like we're moving toward a new process. So
yeah, I don't favor moving to a new process.
Okay.
However, if everybody wants to, I'm not fighting City Hall.
Okay, you'll work the new process. Okay. Councilmember Downing, did you want to weigh in at all on that, on the process?
I'll go ahead. The new process is fine, but I do have a question. I was just wondering, did RUPA have a chance to maybe check in with some of the other municipalities that have this type of board and what their process was? Because again, we're struggling. I know we've come to some type of a consensus, but I'm just kind of curious how other people have proceeded forward.
Yeah, so in some other communities, the mayor and the city manager actually were the ones that did the interviews and then brought the candidates forward to the council.
Ah, okay. And was that just one city, or were they all basically the same?
So I mean, that's from what I remember. So like Hayward, California did it that way. Yeah, I can't remember what Westminster did. But a lot of the other cities too just have a internal team of like this type of board. And I don't know, Heather, if you've seen anything else.
Yeah, I would say City of Boulder and Westminster are more formal in their process for selection. And so I certainly wouldn't recommend that I'm involved in that, like City of Hayward, but they have a different approach. So I think there's a lot of different models out there, and what you saw presented to you tonight is more consistent with how we approach other board and commission organization, but different in the sense that this board's unique in its purpose and role. So there's a lot of different ways we could do it, is the short answer for you, Councilmember Downing.
I understand, and thank you for that comment. And I'm fine with moving, towards the new process.
I'm still stuck, so I would like to see if anyone else had any thoughts on the additional community members. I was thinking that it would actually be okay with me to pare it down and just call it a community member and not specify business, religion, nonprofit, but to have a member that is part of our community in a broader sense. I just feel like we're going to be missing a perspective on how our city interacts and takes care of its residents if we leave that part out and have it just be residents. So I'm still stuck on that piece, and so I'd love to hear what other people think on those additional members. Councilmember Malika?
Yeah, I had a quick question because when I was thinking about the religious member, and if there's only one, who do we choose? So are we going to choose a Christian leader? Are we going to choose somebody from the mosque? Are we going to choose someone?
If there's only one that applies, you mean?
No, well, I mean, what if multiple apply? I mean, why would we exclude one of the others? I mean, I think I'm just curious about what would we do if there's multiple religious leaders who want to move forward and be part of this? Do we just invite them all and maybe make them non-voting members? I don't know. I was just trying to process that.
I think that goes back to, I think it was Randall's question at the beginning. How do we say no to a certain race? How do we say no to a certain gender? How do we say no to anybody? Mm-hmm. Like, so if we have 5 people from Ward 3 and they're a variety of ethnic and gender and religious and sexual orientation. And then how do you pick 2? You've discarded 3. Are they going to be offended? I think the exact thing could be said if we have a community member pool and we say, okay, we'd like additional community members. Well, we have a small business owner and a religious leader and a nonprofit person, but we're only picking 2. So we discard 1. How are we going to make that decision too? I think the how do we decide who we want is going to be a tough thing no matter what. And we're going to be at risk of discarding people and having them make that assumption about how we've discarded them or why we took them in. I think we're at risk no matter what we're talking about. I'm just saying, I feel like we need to have a community-based voice be part of this conversation. So I don't know what that looks like. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I had said something earlier to the effect that it's kind of tricky because we want to include all different voices, but in order to have representatives from all these different groups, you can't have a bunch of representatives from one group. And so that means some of those people are going to feel like they got left out or whatever. So I think we need to be upfront at the beginning to say that the point of this group is to have a diversity of voices. And so we can't take everyone that wants to apply for this. And, maybe we should make it a shorter number of years or stagger even. I know that's something that I have seen in groups where they have elected members and they're first starting off, is that maybe from the ward, one person should be like a 2-year term and the other person should be 3, so that you get some staggering there so that they're not continually, being elected at the same time. I mean, something along those lines. But on the other hand, oh gosh, I'm probably going to forget what I was going to say. I think that one possibility could be if we want to get, let's say this group gets started and they want to figure out how to whatever, we have a process where residents can communicate concerns to them, or they decide they want to go out and do some research on something. They could invite business owners to one of their meetings to have a conversation. Or have a special meeting just with business owners. They could do a meeting just to get input from, maybe principals of the schools that are in Northglenn. They could have a special meeting or, dedicate a meeting to talking to faith leaders. I mean, I don't think that we'd necessarily be leaving anybody out if this is like a overarching group, and their point is to try to elicit concerns and questions and suggestions from all the voices of all the different kinds of people we have in our community, that they could be able to do that. This is the format for that. So I guess I'm not as concerned about leaving a voice out, because if we have a variety of people and our citizens are, probably take some education to know that this is the place to go for that, to have themselves be heard or to communicate what they want to say, that this group could, coordinate, these other meetings or special sessions or do some outreach or whatever whatever we think we might need to have happen. And that's just kind of how I'm envisioning it.
Okay. Councilmember Peterson?
Does anybody else or anybody who's listening get the irony that we're talking about a committee on diversity and we're collectively talking about who we're going to exclude? Who we're going to exclude on a committee of diversity? Baffling. right? It's just absolutely mind-blowing on this. And this represents the absolute ludicrous fallacy of having applicants based exclusively on a group identity. There are thousands of people in this city who care about race and equity and diversity that might not fix or fit the particular status quo box. And that's why I think a better question on this application, as opposed to self-identity, which I think is horrific, even if there is a legal disclaimer. And again, I have a little bit of experience on this, being an attorney. I think the bottom line is you have a question saying, what is your unique perspective that you can offer in terms of adding to a committee on diversity? And then how are you committed to the larger aspects of diversity in Northglenn? Once we go down this road of, is it a business? Well, if it's a business owner, is it a small business owner? Is it a resident? Is it a non-resident? If it's a non-resident, what if it employs 50 people? What if the resident only employs 10 people? Guys, this is in my opinion, and I respect what everybody is saying. We want the best people with the biggest hearts that are most committed to civic engagement. Going through a checkbox of preconceived notions of self-identity, and then as we're talking about excluding people in the name of a diversity committee, represents the fallacy of the road that we're on. What is your commitment to diversity? What is your commitment to the city? What do you personally offer? Let us as council members weed that down to 5 persons per ward, have a collective interview amongst ourselves, and make the best decision based on the best opinions of who can make the best collective opinions and not just opinions, but insights and research and questions for our city. So I support a person of faith. We've had so many persons of faith call in on the night of the overwhelming comments on the Citizen Advisory or Oversight Committee, many of which, and I've talked to them on the phone, were people of faith. We've talked to many people of business owners with the Elevate grant, and they are vested and care about our city. These are the people that are hiring people of color, people of diversity, and seeing the impacts that we have on this. So to exclude people that actually care and want to be a part of this conversation is so upsetting to me. It is beyond ludicrous. And it's one thing that we need to start taking a look at. It's like, how can we get the people with the biggest hearts, regardless of perspective, as diverse as possible, not by checking a self-identification box, but by committing to the larger work of diversity and social equity in Northglenn. Thank you.
Councilmember Malika.
Catherine had her hand up first.
No, you actually did.
Oh, I beat her? Okay, sweet. Sorry, Catherine. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, Randall. And especially when you think about when we talk about who we're going to exclude on a diversity committee, it does sound kind of funny. I think one thing we do have to be mindful of is we can't invite everybody to the table because there's just not that many seats. And so unfortunately, everyone's going to have to be excluded at some point. And so not unless we want to think about an entirely different model than a board, which isn't really part of the discussion yet. And so that's where I get really confused about your comments, because we only have 9 seats and we have to be able to fill them and fill them with diverse perspectives. And so I'm just curious, what other ways can we identify folks who have different perspectives without asking them what their different perspectives are? And I know
I think that's
from what it sounds like. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, please. I'm sorry. Continue.
Oh, well, it sounds like you're against like a checkbox idea. And so I guess the checkbox helps inform us what their perspective is in life and how they walk in this world. And I think that's
it doesn't. I would disagree. That's the exact opposite. A checkbox is specifically racial identity politics. And so if somebody says that I'm a Latinx woman, then you're assuming that that person is going to have a particular perspective. And if I am fundamentally committed to this, and I say, my God, I'm a white man in my mid-40s, checking that box then discriminates against me and elevates somebody else based on that racial identity. I want to take a look at what is their commitment to the larger vision and mission in terms of care and concern about this. And of course, Julie, of course, that has people of different racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, religious, age, income perspectives. But if we start down the road, and this is what I'm saying, if we start down the road and saying that we need somebody from the gay and lesbian trans community, and then we say we need somebody from the Latina community, and then we say we need somebody from the Black community, and then the aged community, and then the disabled community. And we go down this, and that is noble and fine, but it's not exclusive or solitary. I want to look at what Martin Luther King said. Not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I want to take a look at what people are, and that's in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech. I want to take a look at what are the motives of the people doing this. Now, as we nominate this with 5 persons per ward, that's where I think that good discussion comes from, right? Well, this person is really merit-based and talented and has this ability, and they bring the perspective of X, Y, and Z. Keep in mind, this committee isn't to fulfill every disenfranchised group that's ever existed in the United States, in Colorado, and the city of Northglenn. The purpose of this group is to do the research to reach out to the disenfranchised groups and to talk to them and engage per Rupa's presentation, to engage in the listening tour, to bring those diverse perspectives on council. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And thank you for your question. That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's definitely some things that I'll have to disagree with you on, particularly because, you know, being a woman of color in honestly so many places, professionally, and actually being as an elected, I've been in so many rooms where, one, I'm probably one of the only women, and then 2, I'm definitely the only person of color. I mean, it really is kind of a slap in the face a little bit, because it's true. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so, you know, I do bring a perspective that, you know, other people can't bring sometimes, because I have to walk in this world a certain way. I don't know what it's like to be a trans woman. I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman. I don't know what it's like to be a white woman, right? I have my perspective that I'm bringing to the table. And that's why it's so important that we have different folks who represent that and who have to live every single day as this individual at the table to bring that forward. I also agree that there are champions in our community that deserve a spot on this board. And I'm not saying that they won't get a spot, right? That's what the collective of all of us is supposed to be doing, is to find these best candidates. And so I really trust that as a council, we could elevate those champions where they are and bring them into this. But I'm just saying that, you know, perspective matters, and it's so important that we include that on this board.
Thank you. I have Councilmember Goff and then Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I hear Councilmember Peterson's concerns, and I do understand them. I mean, I think we, you know, there are a lot of different ways to interpret what's going on here. But I do feel that this is a diversity, inclusivity, and social equity board. And that means we kind of already know what the status quo is, and what we're looking for are people who have more than just a big heart, but people who have mainstream perspective on what's going on, and people who have experiences of being excluded, of people who are not being valued, their diversity, their diverse opinions not being valued, and who don't experience equity. And so I feel like those are the people that we do want to have on this board. I don't know how best to, obtain that, but I don't feel like, I feel like we're going to, anytime you have more people who are applying for a position than there are openings, you're going to exclude some people. That's just the way it is. And so I don't feel like there's any, a black and white kind of thing here where we're excluding people for a diversity board is out of line, because we're going to have to exclude somebody, some people, theoretically. I mean, maybe not. Maybe we won't even get enough people. But what we really want are a diverse voice. There's lots of examples from history all over the world of people with big, kind intentions, thinking that they're going to go somewhere and help out people that they feel are less privileged than themselves. And they actually end up doing more damage, and they're not actually listening to the people that they're supposedly helping. And I hope that I just don't want to fall into that. I don't want to say by the time when we're done with this, that this board looks, like a lot of people that look the same, and maybe even possibly have the same opinions, or, I want to hear from people that we don't normally hear from. I want to hear from people who are not typically going to be interested in joining any kind of a city government board because they've had bad experiences dealing with government, or they felt they aren't welcome. And same thing, as a technology teacher, I cannot tell you how many trainings and meetings that I've been to where I'm the only woman in them, and it's different. And I want those different perspectives. So I don't know if we want to wordsmith the application a little bit, but I would like to make sure that we keep in mind that the point of having this board is to include diverse voices and perspectives, and that's what I hope that we manage to do.
So I'm wondering, I think I got kind of lost in a little bit of this recent discussion. Did this come about because we were talking about the fact that we're going to be, because I don't feel like we're excluding anyone, but at some point, if we have 5 interviews and we're selecting 2, there will be 3 people that aren't accepted. I don't know that that's an exclusion, but they won't be accepted. I think what that does is that requires us to lean in a little bit to figure out what are the criteria that we're looking for, which we may not have outlined yet. But what are those criteria in order for us to make good decisions when we do the interviews? What are we looking for? And we might be looking for different things. And so that will be interesting. I think we have a base here when we look at, the purpose, and we can look at basic pieces of membership composition. But as far as what makes candidate A a stronger candidate than candidate B, I mean, we can just gut check that and say, well, I think they're a 5, and Joyce may think they're a 2, and then, the point system evens it out. I'm not quite sure about that piece. I would like to ask City Manager Geyer or Rupa if you'd be willing to ask Gare about the composition of a group like this, because I will tell you, I haven't heard from everybody. I'd love to hear everyone's opinion on the community member. And I'd like to know what Gare has to say about a group like this, including a business member or a member from the religious community.
Thank you, Mayor Lighty. We can reach out to them tomorrow and ask them for their insight. We'll reach out to our regional director, Roberto, Montoya and ask him if he has any guidance for us on this piece. The one thing I would offer for council's consideration is this is a starting point in terms of whatever you agree upon to be the composition. It's a starting point. You're going to approve the composition, the overall creation of the board in an ordinance that could be later amended. And so I'm not recommending that you create the board and then a couple months later end up amending it. But I think it would be really important for council to get to a comfort level with a composition, knowing that after the board starts working in a year or 2 years, whatever that time frame looks like, that there's an evaluation of how the board's working and that tweaks can be made over time. We don't necessarily see that with commissions such as Planning Commission and, our typical boards and commissions. But again, that's why I go back to this is a really unique board. And there's not a right way to do this, but we'll certainly reach out to Gare.
Thank you. Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Been fighting this all my life, and you've heard some of my stories, and some of my stories are true. It's hard to disagree with Randall, and it's extremely hard to disagree with Julie. I can agree with some of what Randall's saying, but I also hear and agree with a lot of what Julie's saying. Catherine Goff, on the other hand, she kind of hit the nail on the head, with the last 3 conversations. And I shared this before in a meeting. Federal government goes into the Navajo reservation with all good intentions, wants to do the best they can for the poor Navajo who is struggling, who, has diabetes, isn't eating, whatever. They have good intentions. I mean, is that what we want? We want, a bunch of federal people coming into a reservation and saying, this is what's best for you? How about hearing from the people that it affects? The people who have to walk that every day. I'm not a black man. I have no idea what a black man goes through. I can try to relate to that, but I do know my own experiences. And any of you can call me anytime you have a day to share. I'll walk through my life with you. I've been living this. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I certainly appreciate this conversation that we're having right now. And I think, I continue to agree, or I continue to believe that it's vitally important that we have people from different walks of life, different cultural backgrounds, different races. I think we need to really be looking for folks here who have been traditionally marginalized and in ensuring that they have a place at the table to share their experiences with all of Northglenn and ensure that we're crafting policy and moving forward in a more diverse and equitable way. I appreciate that, Randall, the quote that you shared about from Martin Luther King. I think, unfortunately, you used it a bit out of, you kind of took it out of context. The quote is, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin." So he was actually talking about his Black children, not about white men or about anybody else for that matter. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we're, as people here, not taking other people's words out of context, in particular people of color, especially when, Randall, you and I are 2 white folks and we don't know what it means to live the life of a person of color. We don't know what oppression looks like. I mean, we have white privilege. And I'm really thankful that we are all going to be doing microaggression training and that we're all going to be doing some implicit bias training, because I think it's really going to serve us all well as we continue to have these conversations. And, The other point I want to make before I make a suggestion for the application is just, I can understand that some of these conversations are uncomfortable for some of us, and I encourage you all to lean into the uncomfortableness and not be scared by it, not be defensive about it, because this is just one of many conversations we're going to continue to have. But I guess I would just ask that, in the future, let's please let other council members hold their time, hold their space, and continue their comments and not be interrupted. I think it's really disrespectful, and I think it's completely against the decorum that we've set here. So on to my suggestion for the application. I think that one thing that we could ask is what aspects of your identity or cultural perspective make you uniquely qualified to participate in this board? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I was muted, sorry. Councilmember Peterson.
With all due respect, Mayor Pro Tem, shame on you. And how dare you accuse me of misappropriating Dr. King's words because I'm a white man and thinking that I'm doing that specifically for a white person. You have been fanning the flames of your personal agenda for months on end. We talked a couple weeks ago, and you indicated quite clearly that you have a superiority of knowledge because you were elected and I was appointed. And you cannot judge my commitment to racial equity and diversity. I have taught as a public school teacher for 16 years, most of which in Title I schools. You have no idea of the background and the history of which I walk, nor do I do of you. And your self-righteousness in this committee and ongoing is nauseating. And you owe me an apology. I don't expect one from you. I'm working for the benefit of the city, and I'm not going to let that pass. Enough said.
Rupa, I'm going to circle back and see what are the pieces. I know you've been taking notes tonight. What are the pieces that we still need to hammer out before we wrap up tonight when we think through the timeline of where we're headed?
So first of all, just on the makeup of the board, I think what I heard is an agreement on 2 from each ward and 1 youth member. And then, so that's a total of 9. And then a council liaison who would be non-voting. The question that we'll ask AIR tomorrow is what their opinion is on having a business owner and a religious partner to serve on the board as well. For the application, which we don't have to decide tonight, but so there's that inconsistency of, are you at least 18 years old? So I'll change that to 16. And I guess it's not really clear on whether or not we want to add some of the identifying information with legal language on there. And then if we want to add any additional questions to the application as well. Let me see. And what I did here is consensus on, well, from the people that did speak up, that the postcards are something that we do want to move forward with. Let me see. And then so the process of selection, one idea that I heard, which I'm not sure whether or not that's the consensus from everybody, but we would have all the applications come in. I would divvy it up by which ward they live in. So, so Ward 1, for example, would get all their applications for Ward 1. And Those 2 council members would then select 5 who would then be interviewed by the council at large. And then there would be some sort of scoring process to select the 2 from each ward. I think that's the major points. So if there's agreement on that, then I think we can move forward.
That was a very nice summary. Thank you very much for taking such good notes. I just wanted to go back real quickly for my own, just to look at the timeline. So do we have enough information to move forward with this item on first reading on August 10th? City Manager Geyer, do you have thoughts on that?
I believe we do. Yes, Mayor Lady, I believe we do. What I'll do is when we follow up with Gare tomorrow, we can, just looking at our tentative future agendas, if I can add an update to Monday's meeting on composition, as long as council's okay, if it's a late in the day add on Friday item, then we'll do that. Or we'll try to make sure it happens by July 27th.
Okay.
So that way there's clarity by council and support in the board composition. That's critical. I mean, that's the primary element of the ordinance. So we've got to get that worked out.
Okay. And then, so that would tee us up for the timeline that you presented.
Correct. And what we can do on the interview process, we can start outlining that. We wouldn't be able to have that ready by Monday, but maybe that's a additional piece that we shoot for a discussion item on July 27th, if not August 3rd. I can figure that piece out. And then the only other piece, I agree, Rupa, you did an excellent job capturing everything. Is the request about thinking about the vacancy, how council would fill vacancies in the future. So we'll start doing some research and figuring out what some good practices are in other communities and talk with Gare about that piece as well.
Okay. So we made some adjustments to the process, but there was a lot of support for the board as presented. Thank you again, Rupa, for all of your work behind the scenes, because that was a lot and it was very well done, and it definitely teed up a great conversation tonight. So thank you for that. If there are any final comments about what Heather or Rupa need to do to move forward, otherwise I think we've come to the end of our meeting. Okay, thank you very much. We are now adjourned. We'll see you on Monday.
Thank you.